It's a hard business restoring order to an unruly group like this after a break. Well, one of the virtues of a conference like this is showing a little flexibility, and that's what we just did. And now we'd like to end this session with Diane Bailey. And Diane, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Back in the early 1990s, when I was writing my engineering dissertation at Berkeley, my friends and I threw the occasional party. Okay, weekly party. It was Berkeley, after all. At these parties, we danced to songs like CNC Music Factory's, things that make you go, While we were dancing to this song's fun beat, economist Nicholas Perna was busy coining the term jobless recovery to describe what happened after the 1991 recession, shown here in gray on this plot of jobless claims. As Perna said, the growth in the economy has come mostly from rising productivity, not new jobs. If ever there was a term to make you go, jobless recovery was it. A jobless recovery stood as potential evidence that firms were increasingly turning to technology over people. Some economists argued that automation, not newly hired workers, were responsible for the productivity gains that helped the economy bounce back after the recession, hence the jobless and jobless recovery. With continuing advances in AI and robotics, some computer science researchers and economists now tell us that we are poised for a surge in the replacement of people with technology, which is why we are all gathered here today. Their estimates vary, but they tell us that intelligent machines, none unlike Sophia here, this AI robot that Charlie Rose interviewed on 60 Minutes back in October, may take over somewhere between 40 to 100% of our jobs by the end of this century. In other words, folks, these pundits are not debating if AI and robotics will take over our jobs, but when they will do so. Of course, we've heard these kinds of unemployment forecasts in the past about other kinds of technology. And like Richard, I was curious about what I perceived as a fairly striking increase in the discourse around AI, like Sophia and her ilk, as a great job replacer as compared to other technologies. We used to see a book or two about every decade, but lately it seems like it's been an onslaught. So I built this chart of the number of books published since World War II about technology and the future of work, to be read really as the end of work or the not so much a future of work. Each of these peaks or grouping of peaks, judging by its timing and the content of the books published around it, reflects a new technology or a set of technologies. The first peak is automation. Books during this period discuss how automatic controlled machines may take over our factory jobs. The second grouping is computers, with books on how computers may take over our office jobs. The third peak is IT and networks, in particular broadband internet. Books here explain how people in other countries using computers may take over our service and knowledge work jobs. And this last peak is AI, with books telling us that AI might take over any jobs that we still have left, plus all those jobs that other people took away from us. That AI peak represents a pretty steep increase. The last time we saw a plot like this, Al Gore was on a stage in a cherry picker talking to us about carbon dioxide levels. The potential outcomes for the planet that Vice President Gore described with respect to global warming were troubling and seemingly certain. At play with AI and robots are potential outcomes for employment that are similarly troubling and, according to these books, certain. If, like me, you've been reading these books, you may have noticed that after predicting the end of work, they're rather quickly pointing out the benefits of leisure, since we're apparently going to have a lot of it, which got me wondering about scholarly books on leisure, and sure enough, There they are, mostly trailing those peaks on technology. You notice that we're missing on the far side there a peak to match the peak for AI. So if in the next couple of years you see an upswing in the publication of books on leisure, you heard it here first. That seems like a pretty massive change. Everybody stays at home enjoying leisure, perhaps dancing. I'll have to dust off my old CDs, while AI-based technologies do all the work. In other words, none of us will have a job anymore. You may be harboring some concerns about this arrangement that go far beyond the pragmatic consideration of what you're going to do with yourself all day. From a variety of perspectives, you may find yourself questioning this neo-Millsian gospel of leisure that is emerging from technical elites of the Silicon Valley. Perhaps most immediately, from a financial perspective, you might wonder, how will I buy things and in general support myself? Who's going to pay me, and why would they do that? And will they do so forever? From a political perspective, you might ask, what power will I and everyone else on my street have, say, to vote in elections, to determine the laws of the land, to shape our culture, our schools, our society, as compared to the people who own these technologies? From a psychological perspective, your concerns may be different still as you ask, from what will I derive my sense of identity and self-esteem if not work? From a sociological perspective, you might wonder, what will life be like in my neighborhood if everyone is home all day? What will my marriage and family be like? Finally, from a philosophical perspective, you might begin to question the meaning of work and leisure. Aristotle said, we are unleisurely to have leisure. Notice the pairing of the two, which is a bit different than saying leisure is the point of life. These are just a few of the questions that the mere idea of a world without work ushers forth. The authors of these books on AI and the future of work typically put forward a single solution for the financial concerns of pay and support, and no answer at all for the other concerns that I've listed, perhaps because they didn't occur to them. I can wrap up in 3 words for you their most common solution to our financial concerns: universal basic income. Here's a quote from Elon Musk, as reported in Fortune 1 month ago. I think there's a pretty good chance we end up with a universal basic income or something like that due to automation. I'm not sure what else one would do. Actually, there's a lot else that one could do, as I hope to make clear. But first, if you're wondering exactly what a universal basic income is, let me explain. Each word in this term has meaning. Income means that we'll receive money from the government in lieu of a paycheck. Basic means it won't be a ton of money, just in case you were getting all happy. Just enough to keep us out of poverty. And universal means that everyone will get it, rich and poor alike, so that rich poor people won't resent what the rest of us are getting. Now, neither Elon Musk nor the authors of these books made up this idea of a universal basic income. Rather, in the US, the idea of a universal basic income, or UBI, was put forward most famously in 1968, when the 5 economists listed on this slide, plus 1,000 of their collaborators, sent an open letter to Congress advocating for it. Its history goes back far longer than that, though. We can trace it back to the 1500s, and over time, politicians across the spectrum have supported it, as the other names on this slide indicate. Notably, the promoters of UBI listed on the slide did not offer it as a replacement of a job. Instead, they discussed it as a means of, among other things, making retributions for the problems of property distribution and ownership, dismantling the welfare system, reforming capitalism into socialism, recognizing unpaid labor, permitting shorter work weeks, or achieving full employment. Tech elites are unique among the names on this slide for advocating UBI as a means to make up for the 0-hour work weeks that they argue will accompany AI-induced technological unemployment. Notice the rather striking difference in intent between full employment and zero employment. UBI has its merits and is worthy of discussion independent of any impending job loss. But my larger point here is that offering up UBI as a solution to a jobless economy is viewing the problem too narrowly. Narrow views of the problem are going to be a theme in my talk. To help us see past them, I'm first going to argue against something that we hold as a truism. Then I'm going to share two lessons from my field, the study of technology and work, that have import for a discussion of AI. And then I'm going to use the particular example of self-driving vehicles to show how we're being shepherded into narrow solution spaces in which AI is seen as the only solution to a given problem. All along, I'm going to be arguing for broader conceptualizations of problems, broader solution spaces, and a diversity of thinkers at the table when making decisions about our future. Before we begin on this, I'll just note that some folks would say that we don't need to worry about the claims because AI researchers have once again wildly exaggerated what is possible. It is true that AI researchers in the past have gotten into trouble with exaggerated claims, which dried up their government funding and sent them into some personal hell that they bleakly referred to as an AI winter. Well, I would caution that history is replete with innovators who exaggerated early claims for technologies that did in fact eventually emerge. As David Hounshell points out in his wonderful history of the American production system, Eli Whitney did as much for interchangeable parts, and Henry Ford did the same for the assembly line. And those innovations continue to have a big impact on how we work today, as the slide shows. What harm is there in considering the possibility that AI researchers today may, like Whitney and Ford before them, be exaggerating claims that someday do materialize? Surely it would be better for us to be prepared than not. So let's begin by challenging a seeming truism. To do that, let's look at this chart that I built as a conceptual tool to get us thinking about AI robots and the future of work. The chart displays the relative contribution of humans and technology to work. The y-axis on the chart shows the percentage contributions from humans to work. And the x-axis shows the percentage contribution from technology. This blue line is going to represent the set of possible distributions between humans and technology. Given that we're the only two players in the game, it represents our efficient frontier because all the points below it don't sum to 100 and the points above it exceed 100. Way back when, we started here on the y-axis at the X origin. Realistically, we probably never stayed here more than a day. Imagine some early human who thought he'd slay a woolly mammoth with his bare hands, goes out and tries that and says, forget that. And the next day he comes back with some pointed sticks and a couple of rocks, okay? So pretty quickly we start moving down this line. Let's say that today we're here with humans contributing more than technology. Not as much as a century ago, not even as much as a couple of decades ago, but still we have the upper hand. The future, according to all of the books, lies down here on the x-axis at the y origin, with technology doing all of the work and humans none. Note that the chart isn't a scale with respect to time. The distance between the first two dots is probably like 40,000 years, and the distance between the second two dots may be as little as 100. But what if there was some desired point right here, represented by the purple dot? What if that was the place that we'd be happiest with the balance between humans and technology? How do we stop there? Is stopping possible? Given that the twin forces of technological innovation and free market exist, so given that innovators are drawn to creating new technologies and managers and the owners of capital are drawn to reducing labor costs, then aren't we just going to get pushed down this line? I argue that we stop at our desired point by exhibiting choice. That's what I want to talk to you about, making choices. Other authors have written about making economic and political choices to restore capitalism. For example, Robert Reich comes to mind. Or to repair our democracy, as Robert McChesney and John Nichols have done. I want us to consider making choices about technology. I want us to consider making technology choices because just about every book that I've read on the subject of AI and the future of work presumes that technology cannot, in fact, should not be stopped. After all, technology equals progress. This equating of technology with progress is so deeply embedded in our communal psyche that we fail to see it as the least bit odd. Yet it is odd. It's the seeming truism that I wish to challenge. What if instead I said, and there's at least one person out there who's going to like this, what if instead I said art equals progress? Oh, you say, now you're just funning with us, being silly, maybe a little provocative. Am I? Think about it. Why shouldn't art equal progress? What's so special about technology? Of course, the moment that anyone challenges the truism that technology equals progress, they get called a Luddite. We seem to be nearing a point where the belief that technology equals progress may lead us to a place where the only ones with a right to work are AI robots and the people who make or own them. That possibility is surely one of those things that ought to make you go, If we're the least bit concerned about getting those UBI checks every month, or just not sure that the Y origin is where we want to land up on my chart, then we need to follow in the steps of E.P. Thompson in rejecting the reductionist view of Luddism, technology, and progress, and instead start thinking about how we can go about making thoughtful technology choices. To convince you that we can make thoughtful technology choices, I need to draw upon two basic lessons from studies of technology and work. The first lesson concerns something called technological determinism. Studies of technology and work have shown that technology does not determine outcomes. I mean, when I say that whatever happens after you introduce a new technology into a workplace may vary. If two hospitals, for example, introduce the same technology, they're not guaranteed to have the same results in terms of how people use the technology or the extent to which the technology transforms work and organization. Steve Barley, for example, showed this to be true in a study of CT scanners. He looked at CT scanner implementation at two hospitals in their radiology departments, and he documented how changes in roles and status differed across the two hospitals. We tend to see differences in outcomes in the wake of technology implementation because people exhibit choice about how, when, and whether they're going to use new technologies. I want to share with you an example from a field study of engineers, a study that I report with Paul Leonardi in an MIT Press book, whose title, unsurprisingly, is Technology Choices. Among the engineers that we studied were civil engineers who design buildings and electrical engineers who design microprocessor cores. Both types of engineers designed highly complex products, and both followed similar paradigms of design, analysis, and redesign. Both types use advanced computational and graphical software to do these design and analysis tasks. But one big difference that they exhibited was how much they chose to automate their work. Electrical engineers who built microprocessor cores took advantage of every opportunity that they had to automate their work. Civil engineers, by contrast, largely shunned automation. Why this difference? Well, one big reason had to do with liability and regulation. Unlike the creation of microprocessor cores, the construction of buildings is highly regulated. Buildings can fall down, and when they do, people die. This slide shows the collapse of the Hyatt Regency Walkway in 1981 in Kansas City. It resulted in 114 deaths and was the worst structural collapse in the US prior to 9/11. Early in his career, one of the engineers in our study was a junior engineer on this project. In an effort to prevent collapse, the process for constructing a building involves state building codes, local building codes, peer review, and quite critically, physical stamping of a drawing with the signed seal of a licensed senior engineer. Senior engineers don't want to stamp with their seal, by which they assume liability, any design that software automatically generates. Instead, they prefer to make every design decision, every material selection, and every element creation themselves. Thus, in response to government regulation, civil engineers in our study chose not to automate their suite of design tools. In the absence of similar liability concerns, electrical engineers took the opposite route. They automated their entire suite of design tools. The case of civil engineers who design buildings makes clear that as a society, we sometimes set in place rules and regulations that shape the choices that people make about how they use technology in their work. In the case of these civil engineers, we don't see that legislation as impeding technological innovation or ruining a free market. We see it as protecting something that we hold dear. Another reason that civil engineers tend not to automate their work has to do with their ability to test designs. Shake tables, like this nifty one in Japan, allow civil engineers to test entire buildings against simulated earthquakes by going like this. It's fascinating and it's expensive, so you can imagine there aren't so many of them. Natural earthquakes also serve as major tests of structural designs, but they are similarly uncommon. In the absence of good everyday tests, civil engineers have to rely on their understanding of structural dynamics, of load paths and shear and torsion, of how forces act on structures, of how materials hold up under stress and strain. They don't trust software to make all the right assumptions. They don't trust it to have all of their knowledge or to apply it correctly. Electrical engineers working on microprocessor cores, by contrast, live in a world of digital ones and zeros, in which one's code either works or it does not. They don't worry that their software won't catch a mistake or that it will make the wrong assumption. They only worry that they can think of all the possible mistakes that their code might make, a problem that they call coverage. If coverage is complete, then they fire away with automated routines to test their code. This difference points to a problem that I have when people predict that one occupation or another is prone to automation, often based on Bureau of Labor statistics or some other rough idea of what people in a given occupation do all day. From 30,000 feet, one engineer looks like another: design, analyze, redesign. But when you get down to the nitty-gritty of work, some engineering tasks are amenable to automation and some are not. Thus, while predictions based on BLS data may get us an initial sense of the problem, I think that for us to really understand AI and the future of work, we're going to need close studies of work. In our close study of engineers' work, we found that engineers made different technology choices, and as a result, they had different outcomes. Their choices were shaped by a variety of factors, including the two that I laid out here: liability and testing for product failure. While testing for product failure is rooted in the technical aspects of the product, liability is a social construct, one that we as a society create. And by so creating it, we task engineers not just with design and analysis, we also task them with safety, an assignment that they take to heart. Technology did not determine outcomes in this study. Engineers did so by making choices about how to use technology given their differing situations. So this is our first lesson that we take away from studies of technology and work, namely the debunking of technological determinism. Our second lesson, with immediate import for a discussion of AI and robots and the future of work, concerns how we get the technology that we have. Many believe that we get the technology we have because it beats out all of its competitors. In some version of technological Darwinism, the best technology rises to the top. It wins because it has the coolest features, the highest reliability, the greatest ease of use, or the cheapest price. The belief that we have could not be further from the truth. As David Noble in his famous study of numerical control and others have shown us, the technologies we get are not ones that pass some Darwinian test of technological superiority, Rather, the technologies that we get are the ones that are ushered to us by a host of stakeholders acting in political ways to shape outcomes that they desire. In our study of engineers, we found that choices around automation and not any technological Darwinism shaped which technologies existed in the engineers' workplaces, as this slide illustrates. At the top, we see microprocessor core designs. Electrical engineers who did these designs chose to automate the handoffs between technologies such that the output of one technology automatically becomes the input for the next technology. And that's true across the 4 tasks that I have labeled here and those technologies. To reduce interface issues between the connecting technologies, the engineers selected just a single technology for each task. The technology chosen for each task may not have been the cheapest or the most reliable one. Rather, it may have been the one whose vendor was willing to configure it the way that the engineers wanted. With automated handoffs, technologies across tasks could run as one, as that box is meant to illustrate. Civil engineers' choice not to automate handoffs, note no box on the bottom figure, meant that the interface between technologies was not so important for them as it was for electrical engineering. Civil engineers were free to use whatever technology they wanted, and thus multiple technologies often existed for each task. There simply was no need to determine which one was best. As I hope this example helps to illustrate, technological progress is not some natural phenomenon in which one technical advance leads naturally to another and that to another still, all seemingly without human motivation and all based on clear technological innovation. Rather, technological progress, or the lack thereof, is directly shaped by people making choices. Thus, it's not strange at all to think that you and I, as the people whose jobs are at risk here and who people who use technology in our work, might similarly make technology choices. How we make these choices is a matter of discussion. We might, if we can, choose in a workplace to use an AI technology or not, right? Or we might turn to unions and professional associations to take action on our behalf, as my student Dan Schaller tells us is happening in the case of the AMA, which is lobbying the federal government over the mandated use of AI-related technologies in medicine. We might instead work hand in hand with managers and AI researchers to get to our desired point. Whatever we do, the first thing to bear in mind is that we have technology choices. And thinking about the very need to make technology choices with respect to AI technologies, I want to turn now to a rather basic question that maybe some of you have been wondering about too. Why are computer scientists working on artificial intelligence? Why are they after our jobs? That seems a fair enough question. By the most recent tally, we have 7 billion natural brains on this planet. One presumes then that dearth of human brains is not the motivation for AI. What is it then? Well, AI promoters often put forward noble motivations in contexts where AI can outperform humans, perhaps even saving life. Here would seem the technology choice is obvious. We should choose the technology over the human. For example, in the context of the driverless vehicles, about which we certainly hear a lot these days, we are told that the motivation for AI is saving 1.2 million lives per year from motor vehicle deaths. That's the worldwide total figure, by the way. The US annual figure was 35,000, not 1.2 million in 2015. This worldwide figure certainly made me go, I spent a fair bit of time in India. I travel there about every 18 months, and I have for the last 22 years. Indian roads seem a bit chaotic to me for self-driving vehicles, so I looked into it. Sure enough, the chairman of Maruti Suzuki, the largest car maker in India, is thinking the same way I am on this one. Here's what he said a month ago when asked about self-driving vehicles in India. I think no technology will work here when nobody obeys any of the driving rules, nobody obeys any of the systems which are there. And if you have ever sat in an intersection in New Delhi, you know exactly what this man is talking about, okay? And India is not unique. Let's look at this map prepared by researchers at the University of Michigan. It shows the 25 countries with the most traffic deaths in red and the 25 ones with the least in green. India doesn't even make the top 25 in red. And one might suspect that many of the countries that do on this list, look at the map, share India's traffic problems. Also interesting is this other map that the researchers made. This one shows deaths from cancer with the top 25 countries in red and the bottom 25 in green. We see a clear reversal here. The red countries became green and the green ones became red. A writer at The Atlantic noted that these maps show that how we die is a reflection of how we live. Here in the US, in case you were wondering, we are more similar to the red countries on this map than we are to the green ones. Annual motor vehicles were 35,000 in the US last year, as I said. Placing this cause of unintentional deaths between deaths by falling down, which were 5% lower, and deaths by poisoning, which were 25% greater than deaths by motor vehicle. About 1 in 10 US vehicle fatalities involves large trucks. And replacing commercial truck drivers with driverless vehicles is one of the first applications we hear about for AI. All part of making the roads safer. By now, you've probably also heard that commercial truck driver is the biggest occupational category for men in this country, and it totals about 3.5 million jobs overall. So just by this one move, we're going to wipe out 2% of the workforce. The first driverless commercial truck trip, did you hear about this? It was made back in October when a Budweiser truck delivered 2,000 cases of beer in a 120-mile early morning trek in Colorado. A beer run. What an interesting rhetorical choice. Bummer about the job, Hank, but at least they're keeping the beer coming. But why just get rid of truck drivers? Why not get rid of the trucks too while you're at it and reduce our carbon footprint? Getting rid of trucks would prompt a system solution in which we rethink the supply chain and possibly local manufacturing. Who needs a Budweiser delivered from the distribution center when we could have craft beer at our local pub? We don't hear this solution from computer scientists because supply chain optimization belongs to the fields of logistics and operations research. And local manufacturing of anything beyond beer is likely to draw upon things like 3D printers, the domain of mechanical engineering. Yet thinking from a systems perspective allows us to view the larger problem, allows us to consider a wider range of choices beyond just AI, and makes clear the fact that we have choice. What about those 9 out of 10 deaths not caused by a truck? Well, we might want to take a look at this chart for some insights. It shows that driving deaths are already on a steep decline and have been for the past 45 years. Today, they equal deaths from gun violence. About a decade ago, we had no vehicle models with 0 deaths in a given year, 0 death rates. Less than 5 years later, there were 9. While it's true that last year and this year show a bump up in deaths, their bumps up are not uncommon on this chart, yet clearly things have been improving rather dramatically for some time. Which raises the question, are driverless vehicles solving a problem that's been solving itself? To answer that, we have to consider what accounts for the decline that we see in this chart. Is it advances in AI? The answer is no. As the Washington Post and many other news outlets reported last year, the decline in motor vehicle deaths since 1970 was due in part to technology, including seatbelts, airbags, anti-lock brakes, rear view mirrors, electronic stability systems, and improved structural systems. Sure enough, some of these items on this list reflect electronic technology and automation in cars, including sensors and controllers, but none of them reflect AI. Moreover, technological improvements are only part of the story. As you can see, this list continues with laws, regulations, and related policies. Mandatory seatbelts and penalties for distracted driving were important, as was a campaign against drunk driving that included DUI and sobriety checkpoints. Going forward, the Insurance Institute of Highway Safety points to new non-A technology, regulations, and policies that might get us to a near zero mortality rate all on its own. These measures include technical solutions, such as replacing many stop signs with, and traffic signals with roundabouts, and using video cameras for red light violations. It also includes regulatory solutions, such as lowering speed limits, enacting helmet laws, and putting in place graduated licensing for young drivers. So what have we seen in this early example of applying AI? We've seen a claim to solve a much bigger problem, 1.2 million lives saved per year, than seems realistic. We see a problem that in our country rates just above deaths by falling down and far below deaths by poisoning. We see an initial approach to the problem that would remove 3.5 million truck driver jobs when trucks are responsible for only 1 in 10 motor vehicle deaths. And we see a host of technological and regulatory measures that seem to be taking care of the problem all on their own. We ought to find it odd, then, that talk is increasingly centered on a single solution, AI in the form of driverless vehicles. You know, there are even lesser forms of AI that we might find useful and less disruptive, such as lane departure warning and collision detection. Thus, this focus on driverless vehicles is curious, it's narrow, and it's a solution that allows for only certain people at the table when making decisions. Let's consider two other possibilities then. First, perhaps computer scientists seek to build AI because it is the Mount Everest of their field and they'd like to be the first to conquer it. Well, you know what? That's not a bad motivation. In fact, it's one that many of us in this room can appreciate. Second, maybe they just want to make money and see a potential in AI. That's a bit more instrumental, but still, it's not a bad motivation, and still, it's one that many of us might appreciate. Seeking knowledge or seeking money, however, are different motivations than saving lives that seem to be already being saved. And if we recognize that point, then we're free to discuss the real issues at hand with an eye towards a broader range of solutions, and doing so allows a seat at the table for everyone, not just technical elites and the owners of capital. In the same manner and the same way, by the same logic that we see multiple solutions for the problems of motor vehicle deaths, maybe we can take a broader view of the problems associated with work and working and come up with solutions that stop short of replacing all of us, or even many of us, with AI and robots. Instead, maybe we can think of ways to use AI in a supportive manner as we craft a future of work and leisure that lands us at our desired spot. Getting there is going to take a lot of discussion, a lot of reflection on technology at work, a lot of thinking about what we want and how to get it. It means working hand in hand with AI technologists. Together we can move beyond an eagerness to reveal a world transformed beyond our imagination. We can put aside too quick and too simple solutions that work against deep and thoughtful conversations of what is possible and what is desired. To conclude, in this talk, I've challenged the seeming truism that technology equals progress. I've argued that much recent writing on AI and robots presumes technological determinism and technological Darwinism, both of which have been discounted by scholars of technology and work. I've discussed a universal basic income and the example of self-driving vehicles to suggest that we're being too quickly ushered towards narrow solutions of problems. I've argued that a broad range of technology choices exists. I've suggested that the future of work with AI and robots raises a host of questions from a variety of perspectives, including financial, political, psychological, social, and philosophical, and that these perspectives call for a variety of voices and disciplines at the table when considering the choices before us. As the social theorist Rutger Bregman reminds us, history is not determined by machines, apps, and algorithms, nor is it predicted by trend watchers. It is steered by humanity and its ideas. And that is why I so applaud Moshe and the other organizers of this conference, which includes a great range of voices and ideas. Thank you for that. We've had a super day today, and I look forward to more tomorrow. Yes.
So I'm fascinated, and I do think that I can stop at that desired point. I'm not sure if my kids and my grandchildren could stop at that point. Now, I will benefit from what they're doing, but somehow to me it seems like evolution at some point plays into our ability to stop. I do like art, though. What are your thoughts about that? Because it's like, I feel what you're saying, and I'm just wondering if you have some reaction to that.
Right. Well, no doubt there are generational differences. My daughter is 16 and cannot be physically separated from her phone. I think that we need to think about choices, because if we don't, so my whole point with that chart was that I think that we sit here and let things happen to us because we think somebody else is doing something, okay? Many of us got a strict lesson just the other week about, hey, guess what? We should have been doing something, okay? Here it is again. I feel like we need to make choices, because if we don't make choices, I don't trust the managers and the owners of capital or technological innovators to think about them for us. The fact that every one of those books that I've read so far, and I'm through about half of the count on that tall spike, okay? Every one of them offers as their solution a universal basic income. And without even like running it past a sociologist or any of the rest of us to say, do you think that'd be a good idea to have everyone stay at home all day long? Is that like what we were hoping for? Okay, so we need a conversation.
Just to say, first of all, I fundamentally do agree with a whole lot of this, and I think we ought to be thinking about choices in terms of what we turn to develop. But I want to play devil's advocate on that for a second, because I want to press further on that. What would be your response to the assertion that, okay, yes, it'd be great if we could make choices. It'd be great if both those who are scientists and also those who are on behalf of capital would, but that if U.S. companies were to say we weren't going to invest in a particular area because we think it would threaten our labor force, that another country would have another company somewhere else, or essentially that to make that work, you'd have to have everybody come together in some sort of harmony to all agree that this is bad, and then we'd all have to cooperate with each other and be almost like a prisoner's dilemma situation.
Right. I agree. I mean, to some extent. And when I read The Second Industrial Age, part of me thought, well, that's part of the argument that Eric and his co-author made, which was that we have to do this and we have to move forward, because if we don't, these other countries will. And I'm like, seriously, do you think that like Japan's going to come over here and try to automate how I run my household? Because I don't necessarily think that's true, okay? I think that some of these things are a little bit localized. On the other hand, I look at things like, well, biological weapons and nuclear weapons, and we certainly make worldwide agreements about those. And if we're talking about the future of employment, don't you think that's like equally important, and that maybe we ought to have worldwide discussions about it too?
That's a good point. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a simple question. Who
Sure.
decides?
Pardon?
Who decides?
Who decides? Exactly.
Not some amorphous us.
Exactly.
What particular institutions decide?
Okay, so you know, I think that this hits us at a really bad time, because I think that one of those I'm being honest. I think that you know, who used to be strong in these decisions? Labor unions and professional associations. What got weakened ever since the 1980s? Labor unions, okay? So if there is any silver lining in the events of the last few weeks, I'm really hoping that one of them is that a whole bunch of workers decide that their union is something that they're going to rejoin, and that they want to have a voice, and that they're going to speak up. And I would like them to participate in these conversations. I would like us all to participate in these conversations at our workplaces. You know, someone who works at a public university, I can assure you that no one talks to me before making decisions about IT that we're going to use or the new policies that we're going to have in place, and I often don't find out about them until I run up against them and realize how ridiculous they are. And so we all need to be advocating for how we use technologies at our workplaces before we don't have a voice at all.
First off, I want to say you have a fantastic presentation.
Oh, thank you.
And I do want to, again, play a little bit devil's advocate here. One of the first things I noticed in your presentation, when you pulled that slide, and if you wouldn't mind pulling up again, with the gun deaths versus the motor vehicle accidents, you showed the motor vehicle deaths trending down, the gun violence deaths trending up.
Yeah.
I think it's important to realize the intent behind both of those items of engineering. One's supposed to kill people, the other one's not. I think it's probably a good thing that we're seeing those trends.
Yeah, okay, yes. It's funny too, they call it unintentional deaths, which really made me think about it when I was looking at poisoning. Like, I think from the person who got poisoned's point of view, it was unintentional. I'm not sure about the person who
From gun
poisoned.
violence?
So yes, did you want to go on? Yeah.
And the second point is too, you had that wonderful graph of the desired location and
Yeah.
saying that all these AI books that we see are predicting 100% job loss, right, as
Yes.
far as human productivity. A company I work for right now is called Amazon Robotics. We were previously Kiva Systems Incorporated. And what we do is we focus on warehouse automation. And what we do with that is we focus on the lion's share of the work, right? So when you talk about driverless trucks, right, there was a comment earlier that driverless trucks can't do like the city driving, right? It's true. I recently made a drive from Boston to Chicago. It's about 16 hours. About half an hour of that was city driving. So you can see the efficiencies that were brought there. And that's something we focus on in our company too, is that when we're getting packages from shelf with Amazon, right? Most of what our associates used to do was walking to the shelf, which is the lion's share of that order picking time. So when looking at that graph, I think that while it's true that we're never going to see this 100% technology-driven productivity, we may see very, very high percentages looking in the 70s, 80s, 90%.
Can you say that last part again? I'm
Sure,
sorry.
that while we may never see 100% productivity by technology, we may
Right.
see very high percentages that
Yes.
are going to border on your 70, 80, 90%.
Yes, and for me that's worrisome. I'm with Larry in that I'm already worried. I already think that we're up against a bunch of things. I just don't happen to see things getting better before they get worse unless we take action. And so I agree that a lot of the technologies that are coming might not 100% replace us, but when I see the advances that are being made in AI and robotics, and I'll just preface this up by saying when I was doing my dissertation back in the 1990s, on my committee was Stuart Dreyfus. And Stuart and Bert were engaged at the time in a big argument with Herbert Simon about models of how the mind works. And I took classes with Stuart, and the types of things that they were grappling with then, when I read Eric's book, I was stunned because I realized that problems that we thought would never get solved or that would take decades and decades and decades to get solved were in fact now getting solved very quickly. And so I think that there is some exponential, and I love the joke about the exponential is the new linear. Yes, I do think that there are rapid changes that are happening, and that's why we need to be engaged now, because it's going to take us a while to figure out what our desired spot is, and so maybe we could get a head start on before the end of the century.
Excellent. Thank you.
Oh, you're done? Okay, sorry.